Welcome to Have a Kind Word with Yourself, a podcast that helps us to keep kind, creative, and connected. My name is Rose Kondo, and I'm your host. I'm a poet, a performer, an occasional strummer of my ukulele, and I love connecting with communities. In each episode, I talk to a fellow creative about their work and some of the things that they do to help them keep well along the way. In every chat, I use the letters in the word kind to spark our conversation. In today's chat, we explore faith, community, and how poetry can shine a light through dark places. Before we start, would you consider yourself an introvert or an extrovert? You're probably familiar with the terms, but extroverts tend to be outgoing and focused on social interactions, where introverts tend to prefer solitude or quiet activities. I referenced in an episode earlier this season with Karis Nelkin that I find myself to be a site-specific extrovert. And I've borrowed that term from legendary Canadian actor Mike Myers. I heard him refer to himself as that in an interview, and it really rang true for me. I love events of noise and chat and connection, but I also really need time that's quiet to reflect and recharge. So I try to keep some balance on being social and solo. What about you? Are you more on one side or the other of this scale, or somewhere in the blurry middle like me? There is, wonderfully, no right or wrong, but I think it's a helpful point to reflect on, to really know yourself. Okay, let's get these kind words rolling. My guest today is Griot Gabriel. Based in Manchester, Gabriel is founder of The Poetry Place and a professional youth worker. He describes himself as underdog, under armor, under God, and explores issues on race, resistance, faith, and identity. He has been commissioned to write and perform with Chanel, Warner Brothers, Manchester United, and Manchester International Festival, and he's performed at Glastonbury, and he came second in the Global UNESCO's International City of Literature Slamovision. Last year, he won the prestigious 2025 Forward Prize for his poem Where I'm From in the Best Single Poem Performed category. He is a brilliant poet and is making amazing things happen in the Manchester creative community and beyond. And what a joy to be able to chat with you today. Welcome, Gabriel, to Have a Kind Word with Yourself.
Thank you, Rose. Such a warm welcome. I appreciate it.
And it's a cold one here today in the north of England, so good to have warmth in words for sure.
Yes.
And on that note, what are some kind words that you've heard recently?
Mm, kind words I've heard. Love is still alive. The context of that is that I was in Piccadilly Gardens last week and there was a man holding a bouquet of flowers and it was clear he was waiting for someone and he,
Oh,
10 minutes had passed, 20 minutes had passed. And me and my friend was like, oh, maybe he's been stood up. And it must have been about 40 minutes before a lovely young lady came running into his arms and gave him a hug. And we were in our own minds kind of rooting for him, celebrating for him around the corner, like, yes, love is still alive.
oh,
Yeah,
that's so
that's
sweet.
a kind moment encapsulated with kind words.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, what a cool thing to have borne witness to.
Mm,
Um, and that waiting, that anticipation. And I can imagine you and your friend were probably taking on some of that, like, will she, won't she, or will they, won't they? And then it
yeah.
ended beautifully. Love is still alive. Ah.
Mm.
So I've got a couple of questions before we jump into the meat of our chat. And one of them is whether you can remember how our paths first crossed, because it wasn't that long ago.
Was it Slamchester that we met? The
It
first one?
was, we had met a couple of times briefly before then, but we properly had a chat at Slamchester. I had seen you at Rhyming Words, which is the wonderful night that Colleen Wood runs
Yes.
over at the Rat and Pigeon pub. And then Kieran, my lovely partner, and I had come to the poetry place, and we saw Lentz perform amongst a whole bunch of other incredible poets.
Mm.
And so the poetry place is at Factory International here in Manchester, and it's just such a great night, such an amazing range of voices. You and Caesar like host it so beautifully. So yeah, we'd had those sort of passings of that was really great kind of
Yeah,
thing, and then at
yeah,
Slamchester, where you were one of the poetry slammers, we had a bit of a
yeah.
chat. Yeah.
Yeah. I do remember those brief encounters now. I remember Slamchester was when we really got our tongues wagging in conversation. So yeah.
And I love that there just seems to be a real thriving of the Manchester poetry scene. And you're such a big part of that at the moment. And you do lots and lots of different things. And I wonder, what is one thing that you love most about the creative work that you do?
I love meeting people. I think ultimately, I think with any community focused initiative or arts-based focused initiative as well, the craft itself is a beautiful thing. And I'll come on to that in a moment about the art of poetry, but at the root essence is meeting people and meeting people who, are similar to you, meeting people who are different to you, but just seeing how this art form, which we all love, connects so many people together. And through poetry, we're able to learn about different cultures, different ways of being, different faiths, different walks of life, and it's like a glue which it's a strand which connects so many people together. And I love going to so many different nights and seeing the different styles and interpretations of poetry, styles of hosting. There's just so much to learn from the people within the scene, and of course the art form itself.
Hmm.
It's a gift from God. I truly believe God is a poet. When I read like the scriptures and I see, from the beginning, God speaks creation into life. The power of the tongue is emphasized, and yeah, you see just beautiful things happening through the words. You read poetic passages like the Psalms, like the Proverbs, and yeah, it's the art form is just a blessing to have, I believe, as well as the people.
Yeah, definitely. I have found myself recently saying the phrase, people contain multitudes, which I love in its own right.
Mhm.
But from what you're saying, I feel like poetry contains multitudes in the same
Mm,
vein.
yeah.
It sometimes gets this, for people who aren't as familiar with poetry or who are maybe resistant to it because of maybe negative experiences in school or something. I feel like it sometimes feels like this really small, fixed thing. And from what you've just said, it's oceans of things. It's
Mm,
expression, it's people, it's lived experience, it's got its own, structures within it, but there are endless ways of connecting through poetry.
100%. And that's a real joy to I mean, it's difficult, but it's also a joy when you come out of that tunnel of recognizing poetry is more than what we understand, maybe through what we've been taught through school, from just kind of culture and society. There are a plethora of different interpretations and access points to poetry. One of mine was rap music. Um,
Hmm.
I grew up listening to rap, grime, and the wordsmiths within that genre were highly gifted. Yeah, it was a point where I didn't quite wanted to do rap, but I wanted to do poetry and spoken word as almost like an extension to that for me. So yeah, there's so many different ways. So many, like you say, a multitude. Yeah, I second that.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Exploring those different entry points for sure. Well, we're going to jump into our kind chat, and I'll use each letter in the word kind for a word to spark that chat. So the first letter in the word kind is K, and the word I've chosen for that is kitchen. And I'd love to know what is in your creative kitchen. How do you cook up kindness for yourself?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think for me, it starts with an understanding of who I am in the sight of God. My faith is one of my kind of pinnacle foundations of, I believe, who I am, my identity. So The Bible tells me God loves me, that we humans are the, epitome of creation. We may not always act like that, but God sees us that way, and He made us in His image and in His likeness. And I think holding on to those beliefs, growing up in a world where sometimes there are stereotypes and labels which try and attach yourself, that try to attach themselves, it's a reminder of who I am. I think my kitchen of kindness also is being surrounded by loving people,
Yeah,
authentic people, family and friends, people who want to see the best in you and challenge you to grow. I think community is so important, whether that be a small community or a large community, being in communion with people. I think we were designed to do that. And I think having a passion, having an art form, I think
mm,
everyone has the capability of being creative, and how that creativity looks like can differ. Now being a poet and writing, I look back in parts of my life and I think when I wasn't a poet, where was my creativity being channeled? And
right.
for me, it was football. I loved being creative on the pitch, tricks, skills, and I look back and I think that was where I was being creative. That was my art form. And I think we can find art and our creativity in different arenas of life. And I think well, for me, that was a realization point of realizing I can be artistic and creative in many different things, even as a youth worker. How I engage with young people in conversation is an art form.
Mm.
And I try and find art in everything now that I do.
I love that. I'm also in awe of the fact that this is the second time football has come up in a conversation on this podcast. So I was speaking to an actor up in Scotland called Paul Beeson, and he's part of a company that created shows related to Hearts Midlothian, so the football team up there.
Mm,
And he spoke in the podcast a lot about football and theater and the connections there. And I love what you've just said about football as a channel of creativity because I don't think that's often seen. I don't
yeah,
think it's often seen as a creative pursuit.
yeah, most definitely. And also another sport to liken it to, which I know is the ultimate contradiction, but boxing. I do boxing as well. And
Okay.
I see the creative element in boxing, in combinations, in rhythm, in style, in movement. All of that is almost like pattern recognition, which is a form of creativity. So yeah, sports, let's just say sports, in general is can
Yeah.
be artistic.
I feel like you're taking these giant concepts like poetry and creativity and kind of redefining them in some of the things that you're saying. So, redefining creativity through the lens of sports, which I think has incredible power and probably some real relatability for people who would perhaps never consider themselves a creative, even though, like you
Yeah.
say, everyone has creativity in them.
Yeah, and we've kind of touched on elements of that in our poetry. In 2024, we did a Euros kind of football themed poetry slam, where we had two teams of five battle it out to win the slam. I'm working on a piece which infuses boxing and poetry. So a little teaser. I'm combining the physical art of boxing alongside poetry, and that is in the early works of a theatre production. So yeah, we're pushing the limits where we're
Yeah.
bridging, like you say, two big major ideas and bringing them together.
Yeah, amazing. Oh, we'll have to keep our eyes out for that. That sounds like a really fabulous fusion of different things. I also wanted to mention what you had said before about communion and community and the presence of faith and religion for you. And I don't know if you know this, but my dad is a Church of England minister in Canada. So in Canada, it's called the Anglican Church. And I grew up going to church. I don't now, but I still have a lot of deep spirituality within me. But I remember with such fondness things like fall suppers, or there would be a potluck dinner where everyone would bring a dish and we'd all be in the church hall and there would be laughter and food and it being a space where people would come together in celebration, in prayer, in food. And that really instilled in me, well, a love of bringing people together for food. I just adore it.
Yeah.
But B, the importance of community and, like you say, being reflected back and people seeing and wanting the best for you.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that we seek out those places to find that for ourselves. And I think the poetry community does that for a lot of people too.
Very much so. I was having a conversation with someone in the gym the other day, and I was inviting them to poetry, and they write, and I was like, we have open mic slots, and it was like, oh, I don't want to be heckled off stage if I mess up, and I was like, it's totally opposite to that. It's not like a comedy club where, if you're not doing good, they'll boo you or they heckle you. I'm like, there's the poetry community actively supports poets on the stage, and we recognize the vulnerability of the art form. And you're always championed, you're always supported. I don't think I've ever seen a space where a poet is negatively responded, and yeah, I mean, the only occasion would possibly be if someone was doing hate speech or, really saying abhorrent words, but even that I haven't seen. So
Hmm.
the community is very warm, is very welcoming, is very supportive, and people pour out their inmost parts of themselves.
Hmm.
For some people, it's actually not even poetry. It comes as a form of, this is my journal, this is who I am, this is what I've written, this is what I've gone through.
Hmm.
And then the poetry almost comes later, if that makes sense. A lot of people come on the stage just to empty themselves first and foremost. It's not to perform, it's to empty
Hmm.
themselves. And then maybe on that journey, they then, become poets, if that makes sense. The journey of poetry is then followed, but the space invites people to share first and foremost, which I think is special. And
Yeah.
it just to add, it's like grassroots as well. So it's not elitist. Anyone can access it.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things about it too, is it doesn't matter your knowledge of literature. It doesn't matter your background to that. It doesn't matter your entry point, as you were saying before. Everyone is welcome to get up and share.
Mm.
Well, already I'm feeling really inspired by what you're saying, which leads very nicely on to our next letter, which is
Mhm.
I, and the word I've chosen for that is inspiration. So you've talked about this a little bit, but tell us more about where you find inspiration.
So a lot of my heroes are kind of black liberationalists from the past. So Malcolm X is one of my biggest inspirations. Martin Luther King, Frederick Douglass. I can name a whole bunch of guys that have kind of fought against oppression. Those that have done that in an artistic way, also the likes of Tupac Shakur, an amazing writer and poet and musician. Nas, who for me is one of the best wordsmiths in rap, and kind of UK equivalents writers like Getz and Wretch 32, who kind of in the early 2000s were kind of pioneers for grime, which is, let's say, the UK equivalent to the US rap. Yeah, people that just had great ways with words, could articulate their current socio-economic, political environment in a very hood and gritty way, urban way, but they have the capacity and the intellect to also kind of explore the wider world and
Mm,
how the wider context and the political climate shapes the streets of London, the
hmm.
streets of New York, wherever they may be. For me, it's Manchester, but I think it's a real skill to be able to bridge those two what people might see as opposing worlds, and to be able to tell the story in a way which doesn't just glorify the hardships, but it shines a light and helps people understand how things are interconnected And ultimately, that's why I try to do in my own writings in certain poems. I'm trying to shine light and help people understand, this happens because of this. Uh,
Yeah.
our iPhones are made because of the children in Congo who are mining, and there's an economic exploitation. There are bookies on every street corner in urban deprived communities because it's a form of financial exploitation on those who are hopeless and hoping for financial freedom, but it's a trap. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, which are certain points in my poems that I talk about.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really present in your poetry. I love that idea of shining a light. I see you kind of walking through maybe a darkness with a torch and just going, look, this is the thing to focus on, but not just this, what's underneath it and what's behind it. And uh, those are a lot of really powerful points of inspiration for you. Did your first steps into writing feel overwhelming with that amount of inspiration, or did it feel like it was coming and just it was sort of bursting forth? Where did that start for you?
Yeah, I think it's probably linked to my faith as well. When I
Yeah.
first performed at 16, my youth pastor at the time said, "Whatever you're good at, use it for God. Use that gift to celebrate God." And we used to do a yearly like talent show, and that was so the idea of my performance, my poetry linked to sharing an idea for someone else has always been a theme. So I have this idea that my writing isn't necessarily for me, it's
Yeah.
for other people. But I know a lot of people write for themselves. And, that's the first point of call. And in essence, it is. But also, I also feel there's a sense of duty in my writing. And
Mm.
the griots of the past and ancient African civilizations were duty bound to tell stories for their community. And I also feel I carry that same yeah, that same drive. Yeah, so kind of linked to my faith and the essence of being duty bound to share my story, to share my perceptions of the world is a strong theme.
I sense a responsibility with that there is a skill, a craft, a drive, a passion that you hold, and you're kind of taking that as a responsibility to share that outwardly.
Mhm.
And I also really recognize you were talking about place before as well, representing place. And I'll link in the show notes the a link to the YouTube video of the poem that you won the Forward Prize for, which is where I'm from, where you don't name Manchester in the poem, you name areas of it, but there is a specificity to it that I think is both very specific to people who know those areas, but
Mhm.
also relatable to people who have never been there but know of the grit or the challenge or the day to day or the joys of their own communities as well.
Yeah.
There's that relatability in it being so specific to your experience.
Yeah, I find it quite touching when people from different communities share their their connectivity to the poem. So, I understand its cultural links to places like Liverpool, London, Birmingham. But what blew me away was someone from Brazil saying they connect with parts of
Wow.
the poem. And then I thought, yeah, that's really warm and touching to be able to cross seas and cultures that people still connect with certain elements of the poem, which is a really nice thing to hear.
Yeah, that's amazing. It really speaks to a kind of deeper shared human experience that you really dig into in the poem. Gosh. Okay. Well, we're going to move on to the next letter in the word kind, which is N. And the word I've chosen is noticing. And it sounds like you notice a lot, both within yourself and around you for creating your creative work. But I'd love to know what you're noticing about kindness in particular these days.
It's a good question. I think we can look around the world and believe that kindness is a dwindling act, and in certain parts it is. And I wonder if we can confine those beliefs to certain people, like those in power.
Mm,
I also think, unfortunately, absolute power corrupts. But I also think there is kindness in that there is an underbelly which is becoming more mainstream of people who are frustrated at the lack of kindness, that
yeah.
are frustrated at the evils and the atrocities which are happening across the world. And this kindness is being more brought to the surface, and through our more connected lives, it's being seen, it's being shared. And I'd like to hold on to the fact that there is still kindness in the world. By virtue of seeing such atrocities, I think there are parts of our human hearts where people are challenging and saying, "No, this is wrong. This shouldn't be happening." And I think the next step in our existence is, how do we initiate this emotional feeling? How do we politicize as the people and action it in ways which are effective and redress the imbalance, and our kindness becoming almost a political action? Those are the real hard questions we have to ask ourselves, because, boy, it's tough times right now. It's tough times.
Is it ever? Holy moly. Yeah. And it's that concept of confining, uh, dwindling kindness to some of the perpetrators of some real problematic corruption
Yeah.
is an interesting perspective on it. Because I think when you think broadly speaking, like the world is a mess, where is kindness and all of that, that we live in a time where so much of that is being driven by so few people who
Mm.
are underneath a lot of what we see, read, hear, all of that. So that feels, in an odd way, kind of encouraging. That it isn't some kind of global depletion of kindness. It's just some of
Yeah.
those at the helm are lacking kindness, and that's rippling
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Spot on. And I think for me, God has a big part to play in that. I
Yeah,
think if we can find and retrace the love of God in our hearts, we can it can shine a real light on what's going on in the world. And if there is and I don't say God in in my fixed Christian hat on. I'm talking about God in the sense of a connection to the divine. However, anyone may access God in that point.
yeah,
We can really understand that those who are governing this world are not aligned with
yeah.
a God that creates out of love, that wants to see humanity overcome kind of the ills of the world, that wants to see life, that wants to see growth. Um,
Mm.
yeah, I think it's a spiritual awakening as well.
Yeah. And that sense of knowing that it's still alive in us as individuals, and those things of bringing together community and connection are the
Yeah.
ways to keep it, keep that flame burning, stoke that fire of benevolence that keeps trying to
Mhm.
get sort of squashed out. Yeah, and the presence of divine, I think, is really important for people to connect with, because we don't allow that for ourselves in a lot of
Mhm.
ways. I was in a different conversation chatting with Tina Sederholm and Kieran Hodgers about resistance, like resisting paying attention to those things within yourself, and not giving your space to look at them can prevent them from being present for you. So if you're not willing to kind of sit and go, oh, okay, why is there this turmoil going on in my day today, and tracing it back. So what you're saying about tracing things back to divine or to God or whatever you feel that divine structure looks like for you is really necessary and really important anyways, but especially for kindness to thrive.
Totally agree. I think that is a practice that
Oof,
I've
yeah.
in the last year I've tried to do more of. So really sit with myself and think, okay, why am I thinking this? Why am I feeling this? Let me trace back to the root of that emotion or for or that experience. And yeah, kind of untangling all those interconnected webs of how they, create a certain thought pattern. And it's a difficult practice because our lives are not often kind to us to have time to sit
Hmm.
and meditate, to stop. And we have to find those things. We have to get off our phones, have some time, eradicate this hustle culture, which is harder and harder because the cost of living is real, the crisis, and yeah, it's hard. It's hard.
It is. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Nobody is saying that this is easy for sure. And it is doubly difficult sometimes when you think about people, the suffering of not being able to heat your home, buy groceries, food insecurity, job insecurity, and that kind of thing. But I think to kind of go back to a big picture idea you had about really instilling that self-awareness at all levels of where you might be in your world, giving yourself 5 minutes a day to sit
Mm.
in a bit of self-knowledge can only be positive. It'll be
Yeah,
hard sometimes, but it can
yeah,
only be positive.
I agree.
Yeah. I feel like we're changing the world here in this podcast. But for now, the final letter in the word kind is D, and the word that I've chosen for D is dream. And
Mm,
this, I think, has rippled a little bit through our chat so far. But yeah, what do you dream of for kindness now and in the future?
yeah. I had a conversation with 10 magazine last year, and I don't remember what the question was, but I said one of my hopes and dreams would be to invite members of the EDL to a poetry night, so
Whoa.
they could listen to poetry. I don't think the English Defence League exists anymore. Let's say Reform, if we were to put it in a current context.
Can I just say for any non-UK listeners, can you explain a little bit about
So,
that?
yeah, so EDL or Reform are kind of right-wing political ideologies, which are quite often anti-immigrant, kind of adhere to British nationalism. Um, so we see the visceral kind of actions of those parties sometimes by violent protests. Last year, I think they came to Manchester in the city
Yeah.
centre and things got violent. But for me, racism is an ideology which is taught, and the learning of that means it can be unlearned. And the unlearning of that happens in dialogue, in conversation, in places where there's an openness on both parties, one to listen and an openness for, let's say, the oppressed or the victims to share their experiences and their beliefs. And it's in that openness from both parts that the learning happens, that true dialogue can happen. And I think the poetry spaces are spaces where these dialogues can happen, where you can share a story where someone, even though they may not like the way you look, the way you talk, if they're open to listening to an experience, there can be a connection that can be found, and that can be the start of a deeper process of beginning to understand each other and humanize each other. But it does take a lot of, it takes a lot for both kind of ends of the spectrum to meet in that middle. And I know for some people of color, it's very difficult to almost open yourself up to tell stories of trauma, of pain. But yeah, it sounds quite it's radical to some people, but I think there's something to potentially put yourself out there in the hope that another human can almost be won over, can understand your struggle. I also think that is an element of my faith which permits one to endure certain difficulties for the hope that people can, let's say, enter the kingdom. So I would love to be able to hold spaces where people of opposing views and opinions can learn from each other, and we can nurture an environment of empathy and
Mm,
also understanding in an educative way. So you believe the immigrant is taking your jobs. Well, let's actually break that down. How, you know, the 4% of the Asian and Pakistani community in the UK statistically aren't taking your jobs. The issue is the government's lack of economic employment for the
Yeah.
nation. The one of the oldest tricks in kind of the political book is dividing us and kind of propping an enemy to alleviate some of their own mishandlings. And like, if we understand politically what's going on, that also changes how we respond to each other and how we act to each other. That, we're both as the same working class people, we're both feeling the brunt of the 1%. And if there's an educative journey on that, I think that can change the outlook. I don't know if I'm being too naive in my thinking, but is what I try to do in my youth work, is what I try to do in my poetry, is trying to invite people into understand what's going on.
I don't think that sounds naive at all. And this is coming from someone who has been called naive a lot in my life. But the aspiration of that, the dream of that, the hope that is in that is incredibly powerful. I think a lot of us in the poetry community know the power of poetry,
Mm.
but to think of it offering a space for people of different and opposing views to come together and potentially learn from each other. It both kind of thrills and terrifies me as a thought, but the potential for what that could do is super exciting.
Mm.
I often think of experiences like that as seed scattering activities, right? Where things are just kind of thrown onto some soil and you're not really sure what's going to grow, but suddenly like a beautiful flower is going to pop up or some fern or something. And it just sets the stage for the opportunity for growth. So I
Yeah.
think there is, yeah, so much power in that dream.
I love the seed scattering analogy. I think that's a great way to put it.
There's been a lot of there's been a lot of images in what you've been saying about things changing. So shining the light has come up a couple of times in what you've said, and I think that is it. It's bringing light to the things that not don't just live in darkness, but that we don't pay attention to.
Hmm.
And I think there's incredible value on both sides of what you're talking about. So I certainly wrestle with this myself from time to time of feeling in an echo chamber, feeling siloed, and speaking words through poetry or through a podcast where I feel like that's my gentle activism out into the world, but it perhaps not landing in the ears where it maybe needs to, and not quite knowing or feeling brave enough to know how to navigate that. And hearing what you're talking about with this vision, this idea, is an interesting way of breaking that down a bit. Because I think it's important. I don't think echo chambers are important, but I think having places where you feel buoyed up by people around you is important. And then I
Yeah.
get a little bit caught in thinking, but that also happens on an opposing side as well. And so,
Mm,
how do those two things come
mm,
together?
mm. Yeah, that's so interesting. Because the echo chamber can be a very dangerous place, isn't it?
Yeah,
Um, Accessing those spaces. And that's why I try and get as varied as possible poetry line up. And I think it's important to have people who, represent different communities because
absolutely.
there's this cross contamination of learning that happens, which can begin to, dispel some of those echo chambers or the barriers of sharing stories. And I think to add on that is it's also being vulnerable to share your own frailties as well and your own
Yeah,
shortcomings. Jesus said, before you take the speck out of someone else's eye, take the plank in your own. And I've also gone on a journey of writing poetry, which explores all the injustices in the world and, tries to make right all the wrongs. But also, I think along that journey, you end up exploring the wrongs you make as a person. And I think it's important as a poet to share those stories because our influence and our change also starts within community of the people around us. And if we can learn from our own mistakes in life, I think also how we see the world and people's shortcomings, there may be an element of grace to those who may have a different opinion to us. And the access point, or another word for grace, is kindness, isn't it? The access point is kindness, um, and to treat others how we'd like to be treated.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Kindness, empathy, connection is just at the core of all of this.
Yeah.
I could talk to you for hours, but we are going to come to the end of our chat. We'll wrap up shortly. I wondered the aim of this podcast is looking at ways that we can keep kind, creative, and connected. And I don't imagine that there's one kind of gem of wisdom with this. So this is why I ask all of my guests this question, because I'd love to know one of your top tips for how we can keep kind, creative, and connected.
I think making room for others to speak, whether in conversation on the street, whether in a poetry event, listening. So yeah, as intrinsically linked to that is listening. So you give space for others to speak and listen. I think for me, those are the fundamental aspects of my vocation for the last 15 years as a youth worker, listening to young people, starting where they're from.
I love that. And I see you embodying that in your work as a poet. I haven't seen you work as a youth worker, but I have no doubt that that is so baked into what you do. But you listen and you give that space for speaking incredibly well in the work that you do. So long may all of that continue. As we wrap up here, is there anything you would like to tell listeners about, anything you want to plug that's coming up?
In April, I am starting a 8 week poetry workshop class at Contact Theatre. The application forms will go out end of February. It will be an 8 week, yeah, poetry workshop with me, and it will culminate into a poetry slam at the end of May. So yeah, the open submissions will go out end of February. So yeah, please apply. We'll be selecting 12 poets to be part of the workshop, and I guess this is the beginning of our first kind of poetry collective, which will be labeled the Griot Gang Collective.
Yes, what a good name. Oh my gosh, that is so exciting. I'm just buzzing at the thought of that. Wow. Well, we'll definitely link to that in the show notes, as well as your Insta links for the Poetry Place, because I know you do events regularly through the year. And if you are in Manchester, please do come along. Even if you're not in Manchester, we have people come from all corners of
Yeah.
England to events in this city. So yeah,
Yeah.
come on along.
Yeah. Thank you, Rose.
Well, thank you so much. What a joy to spend this time with you and to really explore some fertile soil, to extend that seed scattering analogy a bit. Some fertile soil about kindness. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I am buzzing. I'm buzzing like the bee that is a symbol of Manchester's industrial heritage. The Manchester poetry scene is alive and thriving, and it's thanks to the listening, space giving, and connecting of people like Gabriel. Oh, there was such wisdom and courage and power in our chat. Be sure to check the show notes for info on how to apply for his 8 week course at Contact Theatre in Manchester, as well as ways to connect with the Poetry Place and to see some of his amazing poetry online. In the meantime, thanks so much for listening. We'll have another episode coming your way soon. You can like and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Podbean. We're now on YouTube as well. If you want to leave a review or comment, it would be so great to hear your thoughts. Also, if you want to find out more about me and my work, that'd be awesome. You can drop me a line through my website, rosecondo.net, where you can also see gorgeous illustrations by Neve Wood, also known as Little Badger. Look her up on Instagram. Our beautiful podcast music has been composed and recorded by Eleonora Rosca. And finally, please share this. Help us to keep kind, creative, and connected.